Philadelphia. Most of our work is focused on the city of Philadelphia. We have 3 programs: an arts program, an education program, and an environment program, and I'm responsible for the environment program. It's a reasonably large foundation. We do about $150 million annually in grants, and the environment program accounts for about 40 million of those. Equity. The foundation actually has, like a lot of the philanthropic world, has undergone a bit of a period of soul searching through the events of 2020 and 2021, and so through that, and then through a bunch of planning work that occurred after that, it has identified its values, including the way in which it wants equity to inform its programming in a way that it had not in the past. So the foundation is an 80-year-old foundation, and this past June was the first time that it had articulated the values that it intended to be underlying the grant making, and included in that there's a set of, I think it's 8 or 9 value statements that are now on our website that are intended to help people to understand kind of what motivates the foundation's work, and also intended to help folks hold the foundation accountable to that. And so this was communicated for the first time this past June, for the first time in this foundation's 80-year-old history that's happened. So we're very, very early in that journey, and what that will look like, how well we will, how accountable we actually will be to those values, how and when we'll get clear on what they mean and what it means to operationalize those values. All that stuff is in the future. Like right now, all we've really done is to say these are things that we think we value, and really what we have are statements. So with respect to equity, there's a statement that talks about the foundation's interest in helping to address the legacy of discrimination and redlining in the greater Philadelphia region. There's a statement about honoring community voice that is also intended to have some relationship to equity. And then there's a statement about a statement that is explicitly about addressing racial injustice and climate, sort of supporting racial and climate justice. And so that's the way we are articulating our commitment to equity. But really, most of, if we reconvene this conversation a year from now, and maybe if we reconvene this conversation every year for the next 10 years, we could have a much richer conversation about what the foundation actually is doing and isn't doing, and sort of how those commitments, kind of how they get operationalized, and in getting operationalized, get circumscribed, right? So like what equity will mean for us is likely to mean less than we think it is, than we think on the front end, when we actually kind of begin to see what it looks like to put those commitments into practice. So I'm going to leave it at that. Maybe that was
okay. That was good. Okay. Hi everyone. My name's Casey. Like Megan said, I work for the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and the Chesapeake Bay Trust was created in the early 80s. I can't tell if the mic is picking up. Lean forward. Was created in the early 80s by the Maryland State Legislature. We are a nonprofit grant-making organization, but we're also a quasi-public agency. So we're not animal. We're kind of half a public agency, or maybe half is a mischaracterization. We're all nonprofit, also partly quasi-public. We are supported by the sale of a license plate on cars that you all may have seen. So our money is not like generational wealth money. It's license plate money. People purchase that license plate, it comes through the Motor Vehicle Administration, it comes to us, and we re-grant it to the public to improve environmental and community health, right? So, but we also, right, under our kind of like quasi-public hat, function a bit like a community foundation. So we pass through a lot of money from the federal government, the state governments in the region, local governments, and we partner with private funders as well. So we're a zipper together of money. that's a technical term. And one of the things that we were created to do was to be more nimble than state agencies in getting money into the hands of community-based organizations. So we focus on simplification. That was a question earlier, and I'm really excited to talk about that specifically. But I want to answer all the questions posed, so I'll talk a little bit about equity just briefly. The trust has, like a lot of organizations, done a lot of learning over the course of our existence. And in 2005 was the beginning of our work, our diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work. It was initially called our Minorities in the Environment Initiative. We don't call it that anymore, don't worry. But it was, that was its initial name. We have a diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work plan. We have an external body that guides us in our DEIJ work. We have an environmental justice subdivision, of which Samara is here and is waving. She's one of a couple people on that subdivision. We are focused on trying to integrate equity in proactive ways into our grant making to the extent possible, depending on the source of the funding. That's a kind of key part of what I just said, only because as folks already noted in the audience, the federal money, it comes with some stuff that makes it harder to integrate philanthropic equity principles in the administration of the funding. But our role is to try and figure out what are the things that are actual rules of that administration and what are the things that are just interpretations of rules. Yeah, so I could talk a lot more about what equity means to us, but we take it very seriously. It's very integrated into the structure of our organization in terms of philanthropic practice.
Thanks, Casey. Hi, everyone. My name is Mo. I'm with the Agua Fund. Unlike Chesapeake Bay Trust, we are totally private. We also are significantly smaller than the William Penn Foundation. Our annual budget is about $4.5 million. So we're just operating on a different scale there. Agua Fund is based in DC, but a lot of our work focuses on Virginia and the broader Chesapeake region. We were founded about 20 years ago, and we are a product of inherited wealth, where it is one individual living donor. And for us, I think equity really comes up in sort of thinking about how we are funding, both the who and how. Agua funds across three main buckets, the largest of which is the environment, but also civic engagement and social services. And we like to say we work at the intersection of land, water, and people. So thinking about who is the people when we say we are supporting the work of the people. And at the Agua Fund, it was a little bit before I joined, but 2020 and the murder of George Floyd was a major inflection point, as I imagine it was for other organizations as well. And since then, we have been more intentional and been making progress towards diversifying who we are funding, making sure we are supporting a broader sect of the community than we had been previously, and also trying to be better funders. Because we are private funders, we do not have the same restrictions. So we have been really focusing on defaulting to general operating support, defaulting to sustain commitments to organizations, and flexibility in the application and reporting process that we can do that might be a little bit harder for a private funder, a public funder to do.
It's the musical mic this session. Piggybacking off of what Mo just shared, one way that foundations can institutionalize equity is around connecting with communities directly, especially the ones that are most impacted, that you're wanting to do the work in, and partnering with them to inform grant-making processes and inform grant portfolios. So I wanted to pose to our speakers, how are your foundations partnering with communities, and how has that evolved? How has your work evolved based on community needs and feedback? And maybe we start with Mo, and then we'll just bring it this way, so it's a logical transition of the mic.
Thank you. So I think for Agua, I think we still generally are operating at a more grass tops level, and that is where our connections are coming from. So we are looking for our existing partners, and we're telling them this, that we want to hear about smaller groups, newly established groups that are doing incredible work. So for one example, we've been longtime supporters of the Choose Clean Water Coalition, and a couple years ago they came to us and said, hey, there's this new group called Defensores de la Cuenca that is starting to really do an amazing job with environmental education and mobilization for the Spanish-speaking community. And that's sort of how that filters in, is through our partners. And because, like I discussed, our long-term partners might not necessarily be representing the most diverse communities, we really do need to be intentional. And then another way that we try to stay in touch with communities is going out and visiting and seeing who's not there. Sometimes you can learn as much about a program by who's there as who's not there. So we try to be mindful of that as well. And also through supporting pooled funds. Casey mentioned how the Trust administers several pooled funds, and Agua contributes to those. And that is another way that our funding is going out to different community organizations that might not otherwise get funding from Agua.
The history of the Trust portfolio, we run 28 grant programs, y'all. I didn't say that, by the way. And we put out anywhere between 12 and 25 million a year. It's actually growing, but I'm sorry I didn't say those numbers earlier. But the history of our portfolio, and a lot of our portfolio still, just in full transparency, is our staff working with our funding partners to develop the application package and to put it out on the street, and it's competitive. But we've done, and we would do listening sessions from the community. That was always from the beginning of our organization a step in our process on what they would like to see, what they want funded, what they want to see as priorities within the RFP. But we've started new models, one of which we'll talk about a lot more tomorrow morning during a plenary session, that are participatory funds. Some of our what's being applied in the participatory philanthropy now for us is that we're actually partnering with, paying groups that are representative of communities that are overburdened and have experienced injustice to help us create the application package itself, including the criteria of how proposals will be evaluated. And that those folks also identify non-conflicted folks to sit on the review committees that will then score the proposals. So there's a succession of power in the decision-making process. Our staff only, I think it's up to $10,000 can make decisions internally. Otherwise, everything's externally competitively reviewed by external technical reviewers. So we've always had the public scoring the proposals. And then those are recommendations that go to our boards. That's always been the model, but now it's there's this further step that the application package and who sits on that review committee are selected by those that are on the ground, right? So it's like a further step in the participatory process for us. I keep talking a lot, so I want to be careful not to get too in the weeds, but we're doing that for a number of programs, and we're still doing listening sessions too with community. So we're partnered with MDE on some work, and we're doing listening sessions in South Baltimore to make sure that the funding that's flowing through our doors is for supplemental environmental projects from polluting events are being designed based on what the community wants the funding to then go towards. And making sure that those things are directly embedded in the application packages that folks are then responding to. So, just as an example.
So the William Penn Foundation is precisely the kind of foundation that, for whom inviting in smaller community-based organizations has been a problem. We are almost the textbook example of a large, old grant maker that sort of has a history of investing in other large, old institutions in the city, and making kind of high-profile investments in big things in the city. So we recognize that there are many organizations who think of themselves as not the kind of organization that is likely to have good prospects with the William Penn Foundation. So there are a number of things that the foundation has recently done in order to try to undermine those perceptions. The first, and what we think is likely to be the most important, is that the foundation has entirely changed its grant-making process to an almost entirely RFP process, request for proposal process. The foundation used to be, and by used to I mean prior to this past summer, the kind of foundation where the program officers would work very closely with select organizations to kind of co-develop a project and then fund that project. And whereas organizations who didn't have relationships with program officers could apply for funding, the foundation was not especially energetic at inviting folks in outside of that more bespoke process. So now at least 70% of our grant making will be through an RFP process, and we are working to communicate the fact of the funding opportunities much more aggressively, much more proactively than the foundation had been in the past. And we've just begun that. We released our first RFPs under this new process in July, and we're currently in the process of reviewing them. The second, as part of making that change, we did something else that the foundation had never done before, which is we went out to communities to share with them kind of what we were doing, why we were doing it, what the values were underlying the work, and what this new process was going to be. So we had a number of community briefings across the city in neighborhoods that house the kinds of community-based organizations that typically had not been applicants or grantees of the foundations in the past. Two other things. One, we've dramatically simplified the application process. The application process to the William Penn Foundation had historically been a pretty labor-intensive process and involved a good deal of interaction over a good deal of time between the program staff and the applicants. Now our process is one a set of 6 questions that applicants need to respond to. It's the same 6 questions no matter what RFP you're responding to, we are asking much less, excuse me, in the way of financial information, much less in the way of more substantial detail from people. And the last thing is that we, in some of, not all of, but in some of our work, some of the RFPs that we are releasing, we are reserving a certain amount of the budget of the RFP for organizations with budgets of less than a cutoff, and that cutoff will differ in different RFPs. But as part largely of our effort to convey that we are interested in organizations that are smaller and organizations that we've not worked with in the past, essentially we are reserving funds as part of our RFPs for those organizations. So that's the sort of first set of things that we've done. They're all really intended to reduce the barriers that we think we understand that have kept organizations from us. We recognize that there are likely a set of barriers that we don't recognize, that we don't understand, and so as those become clearer, we will likely do some things to try to address them as well.
Thanks so much for sharing that. One of the things that's been a theme throughout today, and Stuart alluded to it as well in terms of William Penn's journey, is money is going to the high capacity, well-resourced groups that have always gotten the funds and not going to the communities that are on the front line. What challenges and/or gaps in funding are you seeing that might be hindering investments in frontline organizations and overburdened and under-resourced communities? Magical microphone. Yeah, I think so.
Thanks for your question. I think that there is still too many project grants, right? It is very hard to take money from a project grant and then grow into something bigger. So, for example, Agua used to give a fairly narrow grant to a large tribal organization focusing on food systems, right? And the work that the food systems team was doing was really good, but it is much harder to then grow and say tap into federal funding if your grant is for that. So Agua really does try now to default to general operating support, like I said, and I think that's one piece. There also is still the element of being able to apply, right? The federal applications are complicated, they are long, so making sure that there are backbone organizations who can help, like the Trust, like the TIC-TAC, the Thriving Community Yes, you guys know TIC-TAC. So making sure that our partners know that those resources exist, because I'm not an expert on applying for a federal grant, but the TIC-TAC hubs are. So connecting them there, and I think we are making progress, and the progress is slow, but there is a recognition that we can't just, I don't remember who said it earlier, but the little $5,000 and $10,000 grants sort of limping along is not going to be enough, especially when there is such an influx of federal funding, wanting to make sure that is actually getting to the communities who need it.
Thanks. This is like such a big topic that I'm a little like overwhelmed with like what I want to even like talk about. So forgive me for just like saying a handful of things really quickly. Yeah, I want to second that there's no, like, there's a somebody recently asked me, like, where can I get general operating support? Just like, and that list is kind of short in the Mid-Atlantic. So we started kind of initially talking about what are the larger national groups that do general operating support. Obviously, somebody mentioned, I think somebody said something about multi-year funding, right? There's also a limitation on multi-year funding. We have an initiative that has multi-year funding for collaborative models, but oftentimes because of who we are as an entity, the state, the federal, the local money, it operates on time frames that we don't have influence over, right? And we owe reports within 12 to 18 months, so you have to owe us reports in 12 to 18 months. We also don't like it. Right? But and so if we're going to try to influence that system, there's levers above our heads too that we would gladly go arm in arm with you to go talk about it, right? It's challenging. But it's something that prevents us from doing multi-year commitments. In part too, because Congress isn't always like we'll get a multi-year award that says you've been approved for 4 or 5 years of funding, but you only have year 1 because the rest is up to Congress. Right? So we can't put an award then out for multi-year funding because we don't have it, right, y'all? So I think some folks think that like the pass-through entities like ourselves just don't understand that multi-year funding isn't needed. We do. We can't do it. So we're frustrated too. That said, how are we doing that multi-year award with federal money? We're zipping together non-federal money with federal money, and we're fronting what we can, and then we're saying on paper we're going to try to raise this money for you for the next few years, right? And then we try to do that, and we work with folks in CBFN to try and bring non-federal money into the mix that allows people to purchase things like food, that allows them to have overhead rates higher than 10% of the de minimis. We can talk about indirect until the cows come home. Luckily, it's going to go up to 15% in October. If y'all aren't clocking that, please clock that, right? OMB is changing the indirect rate. It's a big deal when we talk about capacity building that the indirect rate is going to go to 15%. Also, we should be helping, when we talk about capacity building, we should be talking about getting people NCRAs, right? It's a big paperwork exercise, but you can negotiate, it's NCRAs, sorry, I'm doing bad with the acronyms. NCRA stands for Negotiated Indirect Cost Rate Agreement, NCRA, Federal Negotiated cost rate agreement, and it's a paperwork exercise with the federal government that allows you to write into your proposed budget more than the 10%, which will soon again be 15% due to inflation. And indirect is, you don't have to back document indirect, right? That's for your rent and your toilet paper and things that you need to operate as an organization. So when we have to gather backup documentation from entities for the use of federal dollars, they have to show us their timesheets, they have to show us their invoices for purchases. They don't have to show us documentation on their indirect, right? So like, I wanted to talk a little bit about that with folks, just because I think people think that like the federal money has no room there, and there is, and it's actually actively changing too, which is important for folks to think about. And it's legally required as a pass-through entity that if someone has a NICRA that we have to honor it. So if you are successful in getting a 20, 30, even 45% indirect rate, and you write it into your proposal, and then our review committee scores you high, we have to give you that indirect rate. We legally are obligated to do so, right? Now, remember that like if half of your grant's going to your indirect, someone on that committee is gonna be like, that's a lot of money. But like, my point is, if you need that for your organization, then you should think about going through this paperwork exercise to do that. That's just one topic of many that I could like talk a lot about, but I'm gonna pass the mic to Stuart.
Really quick, we have a follow-up question.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, it takes months to figure out.
That one of the partners got the indirect cost rate because they had it previously. Another one did not have it and had to go to 10%. And it sounded like, but I thought I heard you say you could build that into the grant proposal, but it didn't seem like that was enough.
Yeah, no. So the NICRA, if you have went through the legal paperwork to have a NICRA, like for your entity in the name of your organization, then you are legally allowed to.
In federal funding, and that is a way to then, make that application stand out, and you're not going to be able to get a one-to-one match with the federal, right? Like it's just not realistic at the scale that those grants are being awarded. But with the Mid-Atlantic Environmental Justice Fund, AGO made a commitment to provide a partial match, and that's one way that we're leveraging and try to position your application as more competitive there. I'm not really the expert as far as tapping into federal money. I think Casey has done more of that and more thinking, so I'll pass it there.
Yes, unfortunately, familiar with applying for federal money. And I feel the pain, right, of everyone in this room that's had to do that of late, probably more than previously. There's a lot of opportunity out there right now still. There's several open opportunities from this massive legislation. And as our lunch plenary speakers kind of said, be a lot of groups where that is an intimidating thing, and they're maybe not ready. They don't have a unique entity identifier that is a requirement of getting federal money, that you have a UEI, that you're registered with the federal government. Some people they might just see that right out of the gate, you need a UEI, and they'll be like, no, I'm not doing that. And that's okay. They could potentially be a partner that receives funding from what would be a prime applicant, or well, a subworthy applicant to the pass-through entity. And they could receive funding, it would be less, though, just to be clear, because they're not a prime applicant, or I shouldn't say prime, an applicant to the pass-through entity. So they would need a fiscal sponsor that has the UEI, right? And that fiscal sponsor will take 20 to 30% of your grant, okay? Like, that's how fiscal sponsors, if they understand what it costs them to manage the grant, that's how it'll work. Some people are like, what do you mean 20 to 30%? Well, they have to have a ton of staff that's going to do all of the collection of all of the backup documentation and reporting back up to the feds, or to the pass-through that will then pass it up to the feds, right? So fiscal sponsorship comes with its pros and cons, but ultimately that's going to be the answer for some of these groups, right? And we don't, one thing that becomes kind of, that is coming into focus, I would say, this is the last point I'll make on this, because this is a whole area of conversation, is that there's areas where there aren't good fiscal sponsors. There's folks that don't understand how to be fiscal sponsors. This is kind of becoming a hairy topic, right? Just because you have a bank account in the name of your organization and a UEI doesn't mean you know how to function as a fiscal sponsor, or that you understand federal compliance. So I think that we have to get really clear with folks on what it is they're looking for in a fiscal sponsor, so that they access someone that's going to treat them fairly and be very clear and communicative about what their goal is in accessing the funding.
So the only thing that I'll add, and I'll only add something because I don't want to get scolded, is that there are ways in which foundations have always used their capital to help others to access federal funds, and the question is the degree to which those techniques can be usefully deployed in this kind of situation where we're talking about smaller, lower capacity organizations. So, like, our foundation has always done things like establishing revolving loan funds that folks can get bridge loans from in order to be able to do work that they will then be reimbursed by the federal government for organizations who, were it not for that capital, would not be able to access the federal funds because they need to put the money out on the front end. We also, there are a lot of for-profit firms that have a lot of experience applying for federal funds, and we have contracted with those firms to write proposals for organizations. And that's the kind of practice that we've done for a long time. That usually has not been for smaller, lower capacity organizations. It's usually been for coalitions or for municipalities. We are beginning to look at the degree to which those kinds of strategies may be useful for smaller capacity organizations as well. We're a little skeptical is not quite the right word, but we're not at all confident that will turn out to be a good way of doing that. But there is a lot of activity in the space right now, kind of catalyzed by the IRA money and infrastructure and jobs money to help get smaller, lower
smaller or as, I don't know about the term lower capacity, but community, more grassroots groups, is it working to get, to get the money out the door? And how do you take that feedback? And then the second is, you said something really interesting about kind of the, foundations that kind of value the high capacity, larger organizations, and where do you see the potential for paradigm shift around that? And is that part of Willingham's process? Is that part of y'all's process as you kind of move forward?
I feel, could everyone also introduce themselves when they before they ask the question?
Sure. My name is Amy Laura Khan. I'm convener of the Title, here as convener of the Title VI Alliance.
Thank you.
So the first question was evaluation. So at this point, what we are looking at, and there are two aspects of that. The first is, are we more effectively inviting in folks that we have before? So are we getting more applications from organizations that have never received the Foundation money before? Are we getting more applications from organizations with budgets of less than $1 million, less than $100,000? So there's that level of your question of how we are spending
you asked about that with respect to whether we're getting the money in the places that we want to. A good portion of the shift that we made, or at least the way in which we're framing it, is investing money in places that communities want it to be invested, not that we. So that's an important part of the shift to an RFP process. Is these are the things we're trying to do. You tell us how you think they should best be done, as opposed to earlier when it was, this is what we're trying to do, and we think we know how to get there. Really good question. Yeah. I mean, just like what one of the things that we will need to engage with as we move through this process is that when we say that we want to honor community voice, that communities are complicated, and so and multivocal, and so how do we do that? So all of that stuff is yet to be really determined. And as far as the last question about paradigm shifts.
So in our foundation, in a lot of foundations, paradigm shifts are so all of this change has occurred in conjunction with generational shifts in leadership. And so I think that's as important a driver of paradigm shifts within the philanthropy. Thank you, Tim.
still a lot more that needs to happen, and you can't really go back to her third formula, is how I understand it. So the importance of building that relationship and continuing to support is important, and also recognizing that it can be a case where some funders will draw back. It's like, well, they've got this, and we definitely didn't want to do that. And that was something that our board was concerned about, was like, what is our marginal impact as a smaller funder? So I think it changes the landscape, and it also, I like that it presents some room for possibility and like simplifying, right? Like they don't have reporting because you in fact have no reporting requirements. So like the notion that the larger the scale, the bigger the burden. I think some of those large funded foundations have helped those down those paradigms a little bit. So there's a bit of a opportunity and also potential threat to other funders are uncomfortable with those targets.
One of the other hats that I wear is I serve on the board of the Energy Foundation, which is a large financial climate foundation, and so that's a space. Climate fund is a space in which the entry of a good, decent number of tech unions into that space is sort of upending the landscape in some significant ways. And one of the ways is that there has been a good deal of work put in over the past decade or so to make the case within climate philanthropy that equity is a strategic interest. And I think it's fair to say that there's some degree of skepticism on the part of the community in the space about that. And so the conversation about balancing the urgency of the climate crisis and the need to make progress as efficient on the one hand, with the idea of ensuring that frontline intensive communities are part of the conversation and part of the change. I think that is there's tension there
New entrants.
As you're speaking about the challenges that the people in federal funding, I'm just wondering how the process that you're facing those is it you can, like the landscape of federal funding usually the last 5 years has significantly increased. And so how does it align to your strategic plan, and then how do you chase the money basically? So you just go through that process for your organization.
Oh, yeah, okay. Nice to meet you. Well, 10 minutes left. Okay. Well, I'm going to be honest with you that, you know, while equity was part of our, like, an internal work plan for us, and we had clear actions on what we were going to do in the next, like, over the course of the next several years to integrate that into our existing portfolio, we did not really understand or know that this money was coming. So it wasn't in our strategic plan, just being honest about that. And we were approached by a lot of groups to be the pass-through entity for them. And that got interesting real fast, because we had to quickly try to discern who was authentically in the EJ space. I really appreciated the lunch conversation, by the way, because, and ultimately we had done some work with a handful of entities, local community-based organizations within Maryland, Virginia, that had been doing authentic frontline environmental justice work. And we were able to sort of go to them and say, hey, like, we've been approached by these groups. Who are you working with? And we ultimately decided to partner with what is now the group that received the Mid-Atlantic Tic Tac. That is our part. That's essentially the same with a few additional partners are our partners that applied to manage. And we received $17.5 million to establish the Mid-Atlantic Environmental Justice Fund that we'll talk about tomorrow morning. We applied to other federal opportunities more strategically after that, after we established the partnership. And we said no over the course of that time to a number of people that continued to approach us to be a pass-through as well. We didn't want to work with groups that were, as Dr. Wilson says, seeing E.J. Gold up in them hills. And, you know, I think even his thinking around that has evolved even over the course of the last 18 months on like what he sees as the groups that are doing that are trying to access funding in a less authentic way, claiming that they've been working in those spaces when they only recently maybe tried to do so. So yeah, I mean, I would love to say that it was more strategic than that, but ultimately we were approached to partner with people. We didn't approach people. So yeah, the last thing I want to say on that point is, you know, it's been our experience that there is the federal government, state governments, local governments, a lot of really well-intentioned people that are trying to make change now and to staff differently and to move into this space. I think we all have to, I'm constantly reminded by Vernice Miller-Travis that we have to leave room for redemption and welcome people in, even though they're super late to the conversation, while simultaneously trying to hold everyone accountable to what is the better way of doing this. And we're very much like in the thick of it now because the money's rolling out as quickly as possible. It's not exactly designed in an equitable way. We're trying to make the best of that, of a just kind of tough situation, I think. So.
Thanks for the question. I think Agua had been in the food space before, but we are thinking about it more broadly and thinking through support for the food as medicine movement and people who are trying to disrupt food deserts and improve access to food. So we might not necessarily be thinking of it as an environmental justice issue. That just might not be the language we use, but that doesn't matter, right? The important part is whether or not we support the work. So one of the things that we've been working on focusing on is sort of linking the networks and coalitions of food producers in the region with community-based organizations, so that not only are we helping farmers, but we are also helping the people on the receiving end who can get that healthy and fresh food. There's a group called MAFRAC, the Mid-Atlantic Food and Regional Access Coalition, and they are bridging that gap between producers. Another one of our partners is Dreaming Out Loud, and they technically get money out of Agua's social services budget rather than our environmental budget. But they're doing really important work on access to food and with farmers and got a capacity built.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay.
Applied for a capacity building grant.
They applied and we don't know the outcome in this room, right, everyone? In the live streaming people? It's okay, Dan. It's all good.
Yeah, so they applied for a grant and sort of rethinking what it means to be an environmental organization, and the lack of access to healthy and fresh food is an environmental harm. So making sure that groups can address that.
And I would just say that, like, I've watched for the past decade and a half, the effort to get traction for food system work as a climate. I don't think that we've really seen that happen. Like I don't, like, 10 years ago we were doing that funding with our small foundation here in Maryland, but I don't think it's happened. I think, there certainly is funding for food system work as a climate strategy, but that's not where the big money in the climate philanthropy space is. And it seems, I don't see that it will move in that direction.
We have 3 minutes left. Does anyone have one final question? Or, oh, perfect. What? Awesome. Absolutely. Yeah, I think all of our contact information is on HOVA or HOVA, and so I don't know. I've heard it 5 million different ways. It's a big. I don't understand how you pronounce it, but yes, it's in the conference app. And yeah, feel free to reach out to anyone with additional questions. This is why we're here. So happy to connect and follow along. So with that, thank you all for sticking with us for this long. I really appreciate it. And thank you. I say HOVA like it's